It's 6:02 in the morning, a Tuesday. Still dark enough that the streetlights are on. Garrett Wells walks out his front door with a thermos of black coffee and his work keys, and stops dead. Beverly Ashworth's pearl-white Lexus is parked right across his driveway apron. Again. He has a welding job 40 minutes away, a 7 a.m. start, a foreman waiting. He calls. He waits. Nobody moves that car. He misses the job. $2,200 gone before sunrise. Then he looks down. There's a violation notice tucked under his own truck's windshield wiper, issued by the HOA, for commercial vehicle visible from street. She blocked his truck, then fined him for having it. Let that sink in. What would you do if your neighbor cost you $2,200, then handed you a fine the same morning? Drop your state in the comments. I want to know if HOA horror stories are worse where you live. To understand why this hit the way it did, you need to know a little about Cedar Falls Estates, and a lot about Garrett Wells. Cedar Falls Estates is one of those 1990s suburban neighborhoods that was probably beautiful in a brochure. Vinyl-sided colonials, two-car garages, cul-de-sacs with names like Timberline Court and Meadow Glen Lane. On Saturday mornings, the whole place smells like freshly cut St. Augustine grass and someone's neighbor running a leaf blower way too early. It's the kind of neighborhood where everybody waves when they drive by, even if they don't know your name. Most people minded their own business and got along just fine, for about 18 years. Garrett owns the corner lot on Timberline Court. He and his wife Diane bought it in 2002, paid it off, raised their daughter Becca there. His driveway apron is the widest one on the block. Diane always used to joke it was wide enough for a party. He never thought much about that. It was just a driveway. He spent 22 years in the Army, last posting at Fort Campbell. When he retired, he came home, got his welding certification current, and started running a small mobile repair business out of that garage. Nothing flashy. His beat-up 2007 F250 with a rig in the bed, a license on the wall, and a steady stream of industrial and property management clients who knew his work was good. $40,000, sometimes $60,000 a year. Honest money. The kind that smells like machine oil and feels like something earned. 3 years ago, Diane passed. Cancer. It was fast, and then it was over. And the garage still had her garden tools on one side and his welding equipment on the other. And Garrett didn't move any of it, because moving it felt too much like admitting she wasn't coming back. He kept paying his HOA dues on time. He kept his lawn clean. He said hello to his neighbors. He was not the kind of man who caused problems. And then Beverly Ashworth ran for HOA president. The election was 4 years ago. The meeting that decided it drew 9 homeowners out of 74. 9 people. Beverly had 3 friends in the room and a laminated agenda. She won by default. And the moment she had that little title, President, Cedar Falls Estates HOA Board, something shifted behind her eyes. Beverly is a real estate agent, technically. She has a license she renews but barely uses, a husband named Terrence who travels for work and seems mostly just relieved to be out of the house, and a pearl-white Lexus SUV that she treats like a head of state vehicle. She started parking it across Garrett's driveway apron about 18 months ago. Just for quick errands, she said. Just for a minute. The street in front of her place was always full, she said, even when it wasn't. Garrett asked her about it. Twice. Politely. Beverly smiled her best real estate smile and said she'd be more mindful. She was not more mindful. Then, 6 months ago, Beverly pushed a new rule through the HOA board. Rule 7.4. It said commercial or work vehicles with visible business signage could not be parked in driveways or on streets within Cedar Falls Estates between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. $150 per violation. 3 days after that rule passed, 3 days, Garrett got his first fine notice. His truck was in his driveway. It hadn't moved since Monday. He picked up the notice. It smelled faintly of gardenias, Beverly's perfume, the kind that announces her from about 15 feet away. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he filed it in a folder. The truck that had helped pay his mortgage for 22 years was now a $150 eyesore, according to a woman whose only visible job was selling houses she didn't live in. That morning in the Hook, the $2,200 morning, was 6 weeks after that first fine. Garrett photographed the Lexus. He photographed the timestamp on his phone. He photographed the violation notice. He listened to the foreman's voicemail. "Garrett, I can't wait, man. Had to call someone else." Then he went inside. He made coffee. He sat down at his kitchen table. He opened his laptop. Diane used to say he was the slowest fuse she'd ever met. She also said that when he finally went off, you'd feel it in the next county. The week after the $2,200 morning, Beverly called an emergency HOA meeting. She posted the notice 24 hours in advance, which is, technically, the minimum required. Not enough time for most working people to rearrange their Tuesday evening. 6 homeowners showed up. Beverly had her 2 board members ready. Ed Purcell, a retired accountant who voted however Beverly pointed, and Donna Kimball, a newcomer who'd been on the board 4 months and was still figuring out that no was an option. The agenda item: amend Rule 7.4. Expand the no commercial vehicle hours from a nighttime restriction to a full 24-hour ban. Anywhere in Cedar Falls Estates. Any vehicle with business signage. The vote? 3-0. Beverly, Ed, Donna. Meeting over in 40 minutes. Garrett was across town, finishing a repair job on a grain conveyor. He didn't find out until 2 days later when the updated rule showed up in his mailbox, along with a fresh $150 fine because his truck had been in his driveway that morning. Now here's where it gets interesting. When Garrett finally got hold of the official meeting minutes Beverly filed with the HOA records, those minutes listed 5 votes in favor of the amendment. 5. There were 3 people on the board. There were 6 people in the room total, and most of them were observers. You can't vote yourself extra votes, not legally, not in Ohio, and not anywhere else where math is still math. Garrett didn't say anything about that yet. He wrote it down. That's the thing about Garrett. He doesn't react out loud. He builds a file. He bought a $129 Wise security camera and mounted it under his eave, aimed directly at the driveway apron. Fully legal in Ohio for homeowners monitoring their own property. Then he started what he privately called the documentation wall. One side of his garage, cleared off and covered in printed photos, fine notices, and a hand-drawn calendar mapping every time Beverly's Lexus had appeared across his apron, with timestamps. It looked like a detective's war board, because that's exactly what it was. The next move was the phone call to the county clerk's office. Most people don't know this, and Beverly clearly didn't. But in Ohio, an HOA's governing documents have to be recorded with the county recorder's office to carry any legal weight. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the articles of incorporation, any amendments to the structure or authority of the board. If it's not filed there, it doesn't officially exist. Garrett asked for everything on record for Cedar Falls Estates. The county clerk's office smells like a library that gave up on itself sometime around 1987. Old paper, cold AC, the faint ghost of decades of coffee cups and quiet bureaucracy. The clerk slid him a manila folder without much ceremony. Garrett took it to his truck and sat in the parking lot and read every page. What he found was a CC&R document dated 1994. It referenced a two-person oversight committee, not a formal multi-member board. The board restructuring Beverly had used in 2019 to claim expanded authority? Not in this folder. Not recorded anywhere. He didn't understand the full implications yet, but he understood enough to make a phone call. Dale Hutchins is a semi-retired real estate attorney. He's also a veteran, Navy, 2 tours, and a man who 3 years prior had driven 90 miles to stand at Diane's funeral in a borrowed suit. Garrett had welded Dale's boat trailer back together after the funeral, refused payment, and told him to go fishing and stop moping. It was the most useful thing either of them had said to each other that month. Dale's response to Garrett's summary was brief. "Call me back when you've got 30 minutes free, and bring that folder." Garrett drove to Dale's office the next afternoon. He set the manila folder on Dale's desk and watched the man read. Dale's expression didn't change much. He had the practiced stillness of someone who'd read a lot of bad paperwork over the years. But at the end, he looked up over his glasses and said something that stayed with Garrett all the way home. "She's been running a board that doesn't legally exist. Every rule she passed, every fine she collected, it's all built on a foundation that was never poured." He paused, then added, "Don't do anything yet. Let me dig." Garrett drove home in the October dark, the smell of old paper and his own machine oil mixing in the cab of the F250. He didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. He felt like a man who'd just found the other team's playbook and realized they'd been cheating since the first quarter. Beverly, meanwhile, was preparing her next move. She had no idea anyone had been to the county records office. She had no idea anyone had compared her vote tallies to the actual number of people in a room. She assumed, as people who've never been held accountable often do, that she was invisible. She wasn't. Beverly's next move wasn't about rules. It was personal. She reached out to 2 of Garrett's regular clients, property managers, the kind who maintain commercial accounts and don't love complications. She told them, in her warmest professional voice, that his commercial truck was in ongoing violation of community standards, and that they might want to think about whether they wanted a contractor under that kind of cloud. One of them, a property manager named Walt Bremer, canceled a standing maintenance contract. $800 a month, gone. Walt didn't call Garrett to explain. He just sent a 2-line email and stopped returning texts. The same week, Beverly posted on Nextdoor. She kept it vague enough to seem neutral, a reminder that unlicensed commercial activity in residential driveways might violate county zoning codes. She didn't name Garrett. She didn't have to. There was only one work truck on Timberline Court. Garrett read that post at 11 p.m. from his phone, sitting in the garage under a single work light. He could smell the iron and heat still lingering from a long day on a job site. His jaw tightened. He didn't type a response. He took a screenshot instead. What Beverly didn't know, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that Garrett had already submitted a public records request to the county under Ohio's open records statutes. He was asking for Cedar Falls Estates HOA financial records. Not because he had a hunch, because Dale had told him to look. In Ohio, HOA members have a statutory right to inspect their association's financial records. It's written into the Ohio Revised Code, Section 5312.09. Boards that refuse or stall face consequences. Beverly hadn't refused. She'd just never imagined anyone would actually ask. What Garrett found in those records was something between sloppy and criminal. Over 18 months, the board had collected $11,400 in fines. The expenditure line labeled Community Beautification, Front Entrance and Timberline Median showed $9,200 spent. Garrett drove every inch of Cedar Falls Estates looking for what $9,200 worth of beautification looked like. He found some stone edging near the entrance. He found a Japanese maple tree. The Japanese maple was planted directly in front of Beverly Ashworth's house. Dale's reaction when Garrett showed him the records was unusually direct for a lawyer. This isn't just petty. This is self-dealing. She used collected fine money to landscape her own front yard and called it a community project. That's not a gray area, Garrett. That's personal civil liability. Then Dale added something Garrett hadn't caught. He pointed at the fine collection letters in the folder. Every single one had been sent by first-class mail. Not certified. Not return receipt. Under Ohio law, if you can't prove a fine notice was delivered, the fine itself may not be legally collectible. Beverly had been running an $11,400 operation on regular postage stamps. The fine money she'd used to plant that Japanese maple in front of her own house might not be legally hers to spend at all. Garrett drove home and spent an evening going door to door, not announcing anything, not organizing anything on paper, just talking to neighbors the way you talk to people you've lived near for 20 years. He asked if they'd ever wondered where the fine money went. He asked if they knew they had the right to find out. The first person who leaned in was Hector Brannigan. 62 years old, semi-retired plumber, house number 14. Beverly had fined him $450 for a boat trailer he'd parked in his own driveway for 9 days while waiting on a hitch repair. Hector's response to Garrett's summary was unprintable in polite company. But the essential meaning was, "I'm in. Tell me when." The second was Patrice Woolsey, 47, a middle school teacher who'd been fined $300 when her daughter moved home from college and had nowhere to park for 3 days. Patrice was the kind of person who had strong feelings about fairness and knew how to organize a committee. She'd find out later just how useful that skill was. Nobody was calling themselves a coalition yet. Nobody was waving signs. They were just paying attention, in a neighborhood where, for 4 years, paying attention had not been Beverly's concern. She assumed quiet neighbors were satisfied neighbors. She was half right. They'd been quiet. Satisfied was a different story. While all of this was developing in the background, Beverly was on next door, complimenting someone's fall wreath and planning her next round of violation notices. Terrence was in Cincinnati for the week. The Japanese maple looked great. She had no idea that across the street, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old grief, a very patient man was filling a second folder. Beverly found out Garrett was asking questions. Her source was Ed Purcell, who'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Garrett had been stopping by houses. Ed reported this to Beverly the way a nervous golden retriever reports a stranger at the fence. Anxious, loyal, not entirely sure what he was supposed to do about it. Beverly's response was to hire a private property compliance inspector. Not a county inspector, a private one, paid for out of HOA funds, whose job was to walk through Cedar Falls Estates with a clipboard and find things to flag. He came on a Wednesday morning while Garrett was out on a job. By Thursday, Beverly had his written report, and by Friday, she'd issued Garrett a new round of violations. 3 of them. First, garage door paint color inconsistent with the approved color palette. Second, commercial signage visible from street. Third, and this is the one that made Garrett's neighbor Ned Faulkner call him from across the street, non-standard mailbox post height. The mailbox. Diane had picked that mailbox out. It was a solid cast-iron post, painted dark green, with a cedar box on top that she'd sealed herself. Ned left Garrett a voicemail about it. "Garrett, she's making a fuss about your mailbox. I remember the day Diane put that up." Garrett listened to it twice before he called Ned back. Total fines from the inspection, $650. Beverly also posted a redacted version of the inspection report to the neighborhood Facebook group, which was her way of making sure everyone saw it without technically putting Garrett's name on it. The neighborhood saw it. The neighborhood knew exactly whose property she meant. Here's what Garrett did. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. He repainted the garage door, the same color, but now with documentation showing it matched the HOA palette. He lowered the mailbox post 1 inch. He parked his truck inside the garage. Every change was photographed and time-stamped. He filed responses to each violation in writing, politely, by certified mail. Beverly posted on Facebook 2 days later, "Happy to see community members coming into compliance with our shared standards." She used a little leaf emoji. She thought she'd won something. What she'd actually done was hand a very deliberate man 3 more weeks of uninterrupted preparation time, and confirm, in writing, that she was watching his property closely enough to notice a mailbox post was off by 1 inch. That detail would matter later. Meanwhile, Dale had finished digging. He called Garrett on a Thursday night and asked him to come over the next morning. Garrett showed up at Dale's kitchen table with coffee and the manila folder and the financial records, and Dale laid it out piece by piece. The 2019 board restructuring, the one Beverly used to claim authority as a full HOA president with expanded enforcement powers, had never been recorded with the county. It existed in a Word document on someone's computer and in Beverly's memory. From a legal standpoint, she had been operating without authority for 4 years. Every rule she'd passed in that time, including Rule 7.4, the commercial vehicle ban, was potentially void. Passed by a board that didn't legally exist under authority that was never properly granted. In Ohio, when a board acts beyond its legal authority, those actions can be challenged as ultra vires, which is a Latin phrase that essentially means, "You made that up." A court can void those actions retroactively. Fines collected under void rules? Potentially unlawful collection, meaning the people who paid them might have legal grounds to get their money back. Garrett absorbed all of this quietly. Then Dale said one more thing, the thing that changed the shape of the whole situation. He had pulled Garrett's original deed, the 1994 deed, recorded with the county at the time of purchase. In it was a private easement clause granting the owner of the lot on Timberline Court unobstructed access to the driveway apron. Beverly hadn't been rude. She hadn't been inconsiderate. She had been trespassing on a deeded property right every single time she parked that Lexus across his apron. For 18 months. And Garrett's new security camera had her on video doing it repeatedly, with timestamps. "She's been violating a recorded easement, Garrett," Dale said. "Every single time." Garrett was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the driveway. The wide one. The one Diane always said was big enough for a party. "Dale," he finally said, "I'm going to need a bigger camera." Dale laughed, the kind of laugh that meant he understood exactly what was coming. And he was looking forward to it. A few days later, Garrett and Hector drove to the county recorder's office together. Hector wore his good flannel shirt. Garrett brought the folder. They sat at a public records desk and pulled every document ever filed in connection with Cedar Falls Estates. The original plat from 1991, the 1994 CC and Rs, every deed restriction, every recorded amendment. The clerk helping them was a woman named Phyllis, who had the calm efficiency of someone who'd been processing county documents since before the internet existed. She pulled the files. She looked at them. She looked at Garrett. "Honey," she said, "this HOA hasn't had a legal board since Clinton was president." She said it the same way she might tell someone their registration sticker was expired. Factual, unhurried, faintly sympathetic. The 2019 restructuring Beverly used to crown herself president wasn't there. The expanded board authority she'd used to pass Rule 7.4 wasn't there. The fine enforcement powers she'd wielded for 4 years weren't there. It was all internal paperwork, email threads and Word documents that Beverly treated like law, and that, as far as the state of Ohio was concerned, were roughly as binding as a strongly worded text message. Phyllis stapled Garrett's copies and sent him on his way. He and Hector sat in the parking lot for a while without saying much. Hector eventually said, "So, every fine she ever wrote me was fake?" Garrett said, "That's what we're going to find out." Hector stared out the windshield. $450, he said, "for a boat trailer. In my own driveway." He shook his head slowly. Fake. Dale's follow-up memo arrived a few days later. 3 pages, single-spaced. The kind of document lawyers write when they want something to be very clear and also slightly devastating. The summary? Every fine collected since 2019, possibly $11,400 across 74 households, was potentially voidable and refundable. Beverly had personally signed each collection letter, which meant she could be individually named in a civil action. The landscaping expenditure, the $9,200 that bought a Japanese maple for Beverly's front yard, constituted conversion of common funds for personal benefit. And here was the part Beverly probably hadn't considered. Her homeowner's insurance policy almost certainly did not cover willful HOA officer misconduct. She was potentially on the hook personally. Garrett sat in his truck outside the recorder's office for a while after reading the memo. He had a photo on his sun visor. Diane at a cookout, laughing at something off camera, holding a paper plate with both hands. He looked at it for a moment. He wasn't doing this for the $2,200. That was the match. But the thing that actually burned was that Beverly had turned the driveway, the wide one, the one Diane had been proud of, the one that still felt like something Diane had left behind, into a problem, a legal instrument, a fine notice. She'd taken something quiet and made it ugly, and she'd done it because she assumed Garrett would stay quiet too. He called Becca that night. Becca said, "Dad, please don't do anything crazy." He said, "I'm not. I'm doing everything exactly right." There was a pause. "That's somehow more worrying," she said. Then he checked the Cedar Falls Estates original CC and Rs, the real ones, the 1994 ones on file at the county, and found what he was looking for. The annual homeowners meeting clause. Any homeowner could move to reconstitute the oversight committee. Simple majority of attending homeowners required. 74 homes in Cedar Falls Estates. He needed 38 people in a room. He started counting. The garage changed again. Garrett moved Diane's garden tools to one side. Carefully, the way you handle things that belong to someone you loved. The trowels and knee pads and the old terracotta pots she'd never gotten around to planting. He didn't throw anything out. He just made room. The other half of the garage became something else entirely. Printer running at midnight. Ink smell cutting through the familiar motor oil. A second folding table. The wall going up in color-coded sections. Red for Beverly's documented violations. Blue for legal arguments. Green for confirmed allies. It looked like a military planning room, which was probably not a coincidence. The first physical element of the trap was the sign. Garrett designed it himself and fabricated the post in his own shop. Because of course he did. A professional metal sign, powder-coated, clean lettering. Private driveway apron. Deeded easement. Unauthorization vehicles subject to towing at owner's expense. Below that, the relevant Ohio statute and the name and number of the towing company. Ohio Revised Code Section 4513.60 gives private property owners the right to have unauthorized vehicles towed without police involvement, as long as proper signage is posted. The sign has to be permanent, visible, and include the towing company's contact information. That's it. No permission required. No warning period. No argument. One sign, one phone call, and the problem drives away on a flatbed. Dale sent a formal notification letter to Beverly. Certified mail, return receipt, informing her of the recorded easement on the driveway apron and advising her that any future unauthorized parking would result in immediate towing at the vehicle owner's expense. The letter was calm and professional and about as warm as a subpoena. Garrett called Bud Brannigan, Hector's cousin, licensed and bonded, ran a tow operation about 12 minutes from Cedar Falls Estates. Bud agreed to be on 30-minute call the week of the HOA meeting. He did not ask many questions. He had a feeling, based on a prior conversation with Hector, that this was going to be a satisfying job. The coalition took 2 weekends to build. Garrett, Hector, and Patrice worked house by house, never in a group, never with flyers. Beverly had eyes everywhere and a next-door account she checked like a second job. They had conversations instead. They explained what the financial records showed. They mentioned the recorder's office. They did not editorialize. They let the facts do what facts do when you put them in front of people who've been treated like they were too dumb to notice. 14 committed. Then 22. Then 31. On the last Saturday before the meeting, Ned Faulkner, 71 years old, bad knee, uses a cane he pretends not to need, opened his door and listened for about 45 seconds and said he'd be there if Garrett had to drive him himself. Garrett told him the parking lot was paved and he'd save him a seat up front. Ned patted his arm and went back inside. 38 confirmed. Then 43. The crunch of dead oak leaves underfoot as Garrett walked up house number 52's driveway in the October chill. A retired firefighter named Cliff Odom answered the door, heard 30 seconds of the pitch, and said, "What time?" That put them at 46. Patrice Woolsey had a cousin who worked as a segment producer at a local news station, the kind of consumer affairs desk that runs segments with titles like, "Did your contractor scam you?" She showed the financial records to her cousin, a producer named Shayna Wyatt, with Beverly's name redacted for now. Shayna agreed to attend the HOA meeting as an observer. No cameras, Just a notepad and a phone. For now. Beverly, across the neighborhood, was completely unaware of any of this. She was putting the finishing touches on a 22-slide PowerPoint presentation for the annual meeting. Slide 12 proposed raising HOA dues by $15 a month to fund new entrance signage, which Beverly had already designed, and which included a donor recognition plaque she'd drawn with her own name on it. She also parked across Garrett's apron twice that week. Habit. Confidence. Maybe both. The camera recorded both incidents. Garrett texted Bud both times. Bud confirmed availability. His truck was ready. Beverly spent a week building a PowerPoint. Garrett spent a week building a room of 47 people who'd been fined and wanted their money back, plus one tow truck driver named Bud, who was starting to feel genuinely enthusiastic about this particular job. The meeting was in 6 days. The driveway sign was up. The certified letter had been delivered. Everything was in place. It just needed Beverly to do what Beverly always did. 5 days before the HOA meeting, Beverly found out. Not everything. She didn't know about Dale's memo, didn't know about the recorder's office visit, didn't know about Shanna Wyatt. But she found out that Garrett had been going door to door. Ed Purcell had gotten nervous and asked around, and what came back was enough to alarm her. People had been talking to Garrett. Several people. And Garrett had been talking back. Beverly's first move was next door. She posted that she'd become aware of a homeowner spreading misinformation about HOA governance procedures and approaching residents with inaccurate legal claims. She said she was concerned about harassment. She didn't use Garrett's name. She didn't have to. Then she called 2 of his remaining active clients. Same approach she'd used with Walt Bremer. Friendly, professional, concerned. She implied that Garrett's ongoing HOA conflicts were a sign of a difficult personality. That a man who couldn't get along with his own neighbors maybe wasn't the contractor you wanted on your property. One of those clients called Garrett directly and told him what Beverly had said, almost word for word. That client stayed. But the call itself was its own kind of useful. It documented exactly what Beverly was doing and why. Then she went further. She called the county zoning office and filed an anonymous complaint alleging an unlicensed commercial operation at Garrett's address. The county sent a routine inspection notice. Garrett got it on a Wednesday and wasn't particularly alarmed. His operation had been licensed since he started it. He had the paperwork. He pulled it out, set it on the kitchen counter, and waited. The inspector came the following Monday. His name was Gary. He was efficient, courteous, and thorough. He looked at Garrett's license, looked at the truck, looked at the welding rig, took a few notes. He was done in 20 minutes. On his way out, Gary walked past Beverly's property, the house directly visible from Garrett's corner lot. He slowed down. He looked at the rear yard addition Beverly had put in 2 summers ago. A pergola, professionally built, with a large paved patio underneath. Gary looked at it a second time. Then he made a note on a different form. The county had no permit on file for that pergola, or that patio. It was a code violation. A meaningful one. Gary left a correction notice on Beverly's door on his way back to his truck. Garrett found out about this through Hector, who heard it from Cliff Odom, who saw Gary at Beverly's door and watched the whole thing with the appreciation of a man watching a very satisfying piece of dominoes fall. The story traveled through Cedar Falls Estates in about 4 hours. Beverly had gone fishing for a violation and accidentally blown up her own backyard. While Beverly was presumably on the phone with a contractor figuring out what a retroactive permit application cost, hint, it wasn't cheap, Garrett was meeting with Patrice and Shayna Wyatt at a diner 2 towns over. He brought the financial records, Dale's full memo with Beverly's name now included, and a printed copy of the county recorder's findings. Shayna read everything twice. She ordered a second coffee. Then she looked up and said she'd be at the meeting, and if what she was reading was accurate, there might be a follow-up segment in this. Then there was Hector. Beverly had made a mistake she probably thought was clever. She'd approached Hector privately, face to face, and offered to forgive his $450 in fines and give him a made-up title, Infrastructure Liaison, if he stepped back from whatever Garrett was planning. She implied there were more fines coming otherwise. She kept it conversational, off the record. What Beverly didn't know was that Hector had listened to enough of Garrett's research by that point to know that Ohio is a one-party consent state. In a one-party consent state, you can legally record any conversation you are personally participating in, without telling the other person. All you need is your phone in your pocket and the presence of mind to press record. Hector had pressed record. That night, he played it for Garrett in the garage. The two of them sat on folding chairs and listened to Beverly Ashworth, in her own voice, offering a financial incentive for silence. Garrett listened to the whole thing without saying a word. Then he smiled, a real one, small and quiet, for what felt like the first time in weeks. "She tried to buy the plumber," he said. Hector held up his phone. "The plumber gave you a receipt." 3 days before the meeting, Beverly went for the throat. She issued Garrett a consolidated fine notice, 8 separate violations across the previous 4 months, rolled into a single letter. Total, $1,200. The letter was formal and cold, signed Beverly Ashworth, President, Cedar Falls Estates Homeowners Association. It informed him that if the fines were not paid within 30 days, the HOA would pursue lien remedies against the property. She was threatening to put a lien on his house. The house he and Diane had bought in 2002. Paid off, free and clear, for over a decade. Garrett drove the letter to Dale's office without calling ahead. He set it on Dale's desk, sat down, and waited. Dale picked it up and read it once, slowly. Then he set it down and did something Garrett had never seen him do in a professional context. He laughed. Not a chuckle, a full laugh. The kind that makes a man lean back in his chair. "Garrett," he said, "she just threatened to lien your house using legal authority that doesn't exist, under rules that were passed by a board that doesn't exist, collected by a process that probably can't survive a court challenge. And she signed her name to it." He shook his head. "That's not just overreach. That's harassment. And it's on her personal letterhead." Dale drafted a formal cease and desist letter that afternoon. It cited the unrecorded board restructuring, the void status of Rule 7.4 and every amendment passed under it, the easement trespass, and Beverly's ongoing collection activity. It requested she immediately cease all fine assessment and collection actions against Garrett Wells and any other Cedar Falls Estates homeowner pending a full legal review of the board's authority. It went out certified mail that same day. Return receipt requested. It arrived at Beverly's door 2 days before the meeting. Her lawyer, a friend who handled residential closings and was not equipped for this particular situation, read Dale's letter and told Beverly she needed to table the dues increase, get through the meeting without doing anything else, and call a litigator in the morning. Beverly said she understood. Then she went home and, either out of habit or defiance, or a genuine failure to process that the rules had changed, parked her Lexus across Garrett's driveway apron. It was the evening before the HOA meeting, 6:47 p.m., according to the timestamp on his security camera. She went inside to finish her PowerPoint. Slide 12 still had her name on the donor plaque. At 7:15 p.m., Garrett called Bud. Bud arrived at 7:22. He pulled up quietly, no dramatic entrance, just the low diesel rumble of a flatbed rolling slowly down Timberline Court in the early dark. The sign was posted. The certified easement notification had been delivered 9 days prior. Every requirement under Ohio ORC Section 4513.60 was satisfied. Bud hooked the Lexus and was back on the road in under 8 minutes. The street went quiet again. A mockingbird in the oak tree across the road was doing something complicated and entirely indifferent to the situation. The driveway on Timberline Court was wide and empty and still. Garrett watched from the porch with his thermos. He didn't pump his fist. He didn't grin for an invisible camera. He just stood there in the cool October air and thought about how Diane had been right about this driveway from the beginning. Wide enough for a party. Wide enough for a tow truck, too. Beverly discovered the car was gone at 8:34 p.m. Her first call was to the non-emergency police line. The officer who answered explained, patiently, that if posted signage was on private property and the easement notification had been properly served, the tow was a civil matter and fully legal. Beverly told him she was the HOA president. He said, "Ma'am, that doesn't change the property law." She asked for a supervisor. The supervisor said the same thing. Her second call was to Ed Purcell. Ed listened. Ed said very quietly, "Beverly, I think you need to talk to a lawyer." Then he paused. "A different one than you've been talking to." Her third call was to the impound lot, closed until 8 a.m. Bud's Towing and Recovery charged $175 for the tow, plus $45 per day storage. The lot opened at 8 a.m. Beverly did not sleep well. Across Timberline Court, Garrett Wells washed his thermos, set it on the counter for morning, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. He had a big day ahead. The driveway was clear. Beverly was at the impound lot at 8:01 a.m., 1 minute after it opened. The lot smells like rust and cold coffee, and the specific indignity of being somewhere you didn't plan to be. Beverly paid $220, tow fee plus first night storage, to an attendant who did not look up from his clipboard when she slid the card across the counter. She drove the pearl-white Lexus home in silence, pulled up to her house, saw Garrett's sign on the driveway apron, the metal one, clean lettering, posted on a welded steel post, and for the first time in 4 years, parked in front of her own house. She had 7 hours before the meeting. She spent them on slides 14 through 22. By 6:45 p.m., the Cedar Falls Estates Community Clubhouse, a room that typically held the board, a folding table, and whoever showed up on accident, held 52 homeowners. The chairs ran out. People stood along the walls. Ned Faulkner had a seat in the second row, cane across his knees, beside Patrice Woolsey. Hector Brannigan was directly in front of the podium with his arms folded. Cliff Odom had brought his neighbor. Walt Bremer, the property manager who'd canceled Garrett's contract based on Beverly's call and had spent the subsequent weeks feeling bad about it, sat near the back, jaw set. And in the very back row, notepad open, a cup of coffee going cold beside her, sat Shayna Wyatt from Channel 9. No camera, just watching. The room smelled like folding chairs and old carpet cleaner, and the particular tension of people who had been patient for a long time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. 52 people who had mostly never come to an HOA meeting in their lives had somehow all found the same Tuesday evening free. Beverly arrived at 6:55. She walked in with her binder and her laptop and the quiet confidence of someone who had run this room for 4 years. Then she looked at the crowd and her smile tightened at the edges. Just slightly, the way a smile does when it stops meaning what it started as. She glanced at Ed. Ed was studying the floor tiles. She called the meeting to order at 7:02. She launched into the Community Standards Report. Slide 1. Slide 2. Slide 3. The proposed $15 dues increase for new entrance signage. Walt Bremer's hand went up immediately. Point of order. Who authorized this agenda? Beverly said the board had. She said it evenly, the way she said most things, confident that the room would accept her word because the room always had. Garrett stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He held up a printed document, the county recorder's findings, and he read, clearly, the relevant section of Ohio law governing HOA board authority. He explained that the 2019 board restructuring used to justify expanded HOA enforcement powers had never been recorded with the county. He walked to the front of the room and placed a copy of the recorder's document on the table in front of Beverly. The room went still. The fluorescent lights kept buzzing. Somewhere a chair scraped the floor. Beverly said, "This is a stunt." Garrett said, "It's a county record. You're welcome to verify it." He had printed 52 copies of the original 1994 CC&Rs. He'd brought them in a box. People passed them down the rows. People read them. Patrice, who had Robert's Rules of Order essentially memorized from her time as a union steward, was already on her feet. Under the 1994 CC&Rs, the real governing document, the one actually on file, any homeowner could call for reconstitution of the Oversight Committee. Simple majority of homeowners present. Garrett moved. Hector seconded. 3 more hands went up before anyone had to ask. The vote? 47 in favor, 3 against. Beverly, Ed, and Donna, who had finally voted against Beverly on everything else but couldn't bring herself to do it now. So she voted no and immediately looked like she regretted it. 2 abstentions. The board was dissolved. Beverly Ashworth had been president of Cedar Falls Estates HOA for 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Garrett reached into the box. He set Hector's phone, connected to a small Bluetooth speaker, already paired, on the table. "Before we elect new officers," he said, "there's one more thing this community should hear." He pressed play. Beverly's voice came through the speaker, clear as anything, offering Hector Brannigan forgiven fines and a made-up title in exchange for his silence. The room listened. Beverly sat down, then stood up, then sat down again. Ed Purcell put both hands over his face. In the back row, Shayna Wyatt was typing very fast. Patrice Woolsey was elected interim chair by acclamation. Her first 3 motions: freeze all outstanding fines pending legal review, commission a full financial audit of HOA expenditures since 2019, and send written notice to all 74 homeowners of their potential fine refund eligibility. All 3 passed unanimously. Beverly gathered her binder and her laptop and her 22-slide presentation. She walked to the door. It swung shut behind her. The room exhaled. 52 people at once, a sound like something releasing. Garrett sat back down next to Ned. Ned reached over and patted his arm. Diane would have loved this, he said. Garrett nodded, looked at the floor for a moment. Yeah, he said. She also would have had opinions about the refreshments. Ned laughed. A few people nearby who heard it laughed too. And the room, which had been holding its breath for an hour, finally felt like a neighborhood again. Shayna Wyatt's segment aired 10 days later. The title was Cedar Falls HOA, Years of Illegal Fines. It ran 4.5 minutes on the 6 p.m. Consumer Affairs block and got picked up by 2 regional outlets by the following morning. It was careful and factual. Shayna was good at her job, and it did not editorialize. It didn't need to. The county recorder's documents, Dale's memo, and the audio recording did that on their own. Beverly's county correction notice for the unpermitted pergola came through that same week. The compliance fine? $3,400. Retroactive permit filing added another $800 in fees. The pergola itself needed modification to meet code. None of this was cheap, and none of it was covered by her homeowner's policy, which, as Dale had predicted, did not extend to the consequences of self-dealing as a HOA officer. Dale filed a civil demand on Garrett's behalf for the easement trespass. The documented tows, camera footage, timestamps, certified notification, made it a clean case. Beverly's insurance company settled quickly and quietly for $4,800. That covered the 2 lost contracts, Dale's fees, Bud's invoices, and a little left over that Garrett put toward a new welding hood he'd been putting off buying. The 74 homeowners of Cedar Falls Estates each received a letter from the new board, now legally constituted and properly recorded with the county, explaining that fines collected under the previous unauthorized board might be refundable. Most collected. Some, on their own initiative, donated their refunds back to the community fund instead. The self-dealing civil action against Beverly, the $9,200 landscaping expenditure from common funds, settled for $6,000. The new board voted unanimously on what to do with it. They named it the Cedar Falls Estates Good Neighbors Scholarship. $500 a year, awarded to a graduating senior from the neighborhood who demonstrated meaningful community service. The first recipient was a kid Patrice had taught 7 years ago, now a college freshman, who'd spent 3 years of high school volunteering at a local food pantry, mostly on weekends, without telling anyone about it. Patrice had known because she'd seen him there once when she was dropping off canned goods. The entrance to Cedar Falls Estates got new signage that spring. Clean design. No donor plaque. Beverly Ashworth's real estate license came up for renewal in the spring. She didn't renew it. As for Garrett, he moved Diane's garden tools back to the center of the garage. Not because he needed the space, just because it felt right, like returning something to where it belonged. He planted a Japanese maple in the backyard in November, before the ground froze. His choice. His yard. His time. Becca came home for Thanksgiving. She pulled into the driveway, parked her car, and walked in without thinking twice about it. There was plenty of room. After dinner, Garrett stood on the porch with his coffee and looked at the driveway. The wide one, the corner lot one. The one Diane always said was big enough for a party. He thought about the $2,200 morning, about the violation notice that smelled like gardenias, about a manila folder in a county clerk's office and a tow truck named Bud, and 47 hands going up in a room that smelled like old carpet cleaner. The thing he kept coming back to was simple. Beverly had assumed quiet meant helpless. She'd confused patience with defeat. And she'd done all of it, every fine, every maneuver, every call to his clients, while sitting on a foundation that was never poured. If you're in a situation like Garrett's, here's what actually moved the needle. Start with your county recorder's office. It's free, it's public, and it's where HOA legitimacy either exists or doesn't. Know that most states give HOA members the right to inspect financial records. Look up your state's equivalent of Ohio's Section 5312. If you own your driveway, look into private property tow rights. One proper sign and one phone call is often all it takes. And if someone offers you a bribe, know your state's recording consent laws before you walk into that conversation. Beverly Ashworth played stupid games with a quiet man's driveway. She won a $220 impound receipt, a $3,400 county fine, a civil settlement, and the distinction of being the villain in a story that apparently found its way to your screen. If you've got an HOA nightmare, drop it in the comments. The pettier, the better. I read every single one. And if you want to see what happens the next time someone decides the rules are just for other people, subscribe. We're just getting started.